This episode is sponsored by Matt Herbert. Thanks, Matt. Hello and welcome back to Film Pro Productivity and Success, the podcast that helps film professionals and other creative people to live a more focused, effective and happy life. My name is Carter Ferguson and this is episode 85, 10 Types of Self-sabotage. And in today's episode, I cover a topic that will easily ensure that your plans fall apart. It's self-sabotage. Yes, that's when you say you want something and then you go out of your way making sure that it doesn't happen. We need to ascend beyond our own petty resistance, our own negative self-judgment and self-sabotage, our own I'm not worthy mindset. Stephen Pressfield, unquote. Self-sabotage is one of those terms that you hear thrown around a lot, but understanding what people actually mean by it is perhaps not entirely clear. Put simply, self-sabotage is when you undermine your own goals and values. In other words, you acknowledge that there's something out there you genuinely want and believe is good for you, for example, losing weight, but then you do things that directly conflict with that goal, for example, late night fast food runs. Have you ever set out to get something important done and then found yourself just minutes later looking at your social media or doing some other far less important task instead, like sorting socks or something like that? This, of course, that I'm talking about is procrastination, but it's also a classic case of self-sabotage. It's not anyone else's fault. It's yours. And we don't set out to do these things, but it happens all the time. And self-sabotage comes in many forms, and procrastination is, of course, just one of them. Today, I'm going to talk about 10 different types of self-sabotage, but I might mention a few others along the way. And since I'm on the topic of procrastination, let's look at that one first. Procrastination is, for me, likely the most common form of self-sabotaging behavior that I come across, and it stems from fear of failure and even from fear of success. The irony being that when we procrastinate, we end up fulfilling our own self-prophecy. So next time that you feel this pull to put things off, you should acknowledge that discomfort and do it anyway. I know it's easier for me to say this stuff than for you to actually do it, but if you can acknowledge that you are procrastinating, then you are a big step closer to taking action to combat it. And I've covered procrastination many times before, especially in season 1. There's an episode specifically about procrastination, and there's also another episode that's something like 4 ways to combat procrastination. It's somewhere around about episode 8, where I cover things like the 2-minute rule, which, just getting feedback from people through social media, people find it really, really helpful. So if procrastination is a problem you've got, go back and check out one of those shows. But another action that can be classed as self-sabotage is when you avoid anything that runs the risk of pain for you. And that'll be when you feel like you've been burned in life, and you might find yourselves avoiding situations that leave you open to experiencing that same pain again. A kind of negative bias is what it's called when you've had a bad experience and it skews your thinking on that sort of thing, and it might mean that you start to avoid situations. That's certainly why I've not made a second feature film in the 10 years since my first one. In fact, I've had so many bad experiences in filmmaking that it really hinders me when I come to tackle new learning on the subject, or when I'm trying to get some screenwriting done, or simply when it comes down to going out and shooting something new. I am the most limiting factor in my filmmaking journey. Another maybe obvious self-sabotaging behavior is the use of alcohol and drugs. They might help numb the pain in the short term, but they tend to cause us damage in the long run. So if you find yourself turning to the bottle to stuff down difficult emotions or to get through social situations, this is likely a sign that you may be self-sabotaging. Now, this next one is a little bit more left field, but I recognise it quite often in other people. I find it perhaps a little bit more difficult to recognise in myself, but it's being a fixer. As someone who's constantly looking after other people, and that could very likely mean that you're using that as a distraction from facing your own issues or working on your own things. I'm just wondering, do you recognize that in yourself? I do find it easy to see in people, if I'm entirely honest, and regarding myself, I certainly find it easier to help someone else out than to work on my own projects. This links in with saying no to things that don't further your own goals and objectives, which I'll talk about in a second, and which I've actually, I think episode 2 of this entire podcast is just about saying no. Next up, we have being a control freak. That could also mean that you're self-sabotaging. That's when we try to control situations or people, and that just means that we block our own growth. That could encompass perfectionism too, incidentally. I've covered this in earlier episodes. Don't aim for perfection, aim for good enough. You can always refine it later. Another type of self-sabotage that's quite common is that you could suffer from low self-esteem. And when we don't believe ourselves to be worthy of the good stuff, we might subconsciously set ourselves up for failure. People often set much higher standards for themselves than they do for others, in fact. And when you fail to meet those standards, you might give yourself some pretty harsh feedback. Things like, I can't do anything right. I won't make it, so why should I bother? Whether you criticize yourself in front of others or have a habit of negative self-talk, the same thing can happen. The inner critic is, I think that's around about episode 5 or whatever, another very popular episode. This is what we're talking about here. This is the inner critic. And if you listen to them, your words may, the inner critic being that little voice inside your head, but if you listen to that voice, your words may eventually be taken as truth. Believing these criticisms can promote an attitude of self-defeat and keep you from wanting to try again. Eventually, you might give up before you even begin. And this is an important one. It can really limit the amount of effort you're willing to put in the first place. And the lesser the effort, the more likely we are to fail. Stress eating is the next one. And I am certainly 100% guilty of this. Always have been. It's been a thing. Even I trained in, as you know, I'm a fight director, choreograph fight sequences, but I trained as an actor specialised in fights. And I remember even at college, stuffing my face with Mars bars before I was getting on stage. But I'm not the only one. Many people turn to food as a way to deal with stress and anxiety in their lives because it temporarily makes us feel good and it distracts us from our pain or from the fear of what we're about to start. But they know in the long run it's sabotaging important values like maintaining a healthy diet or being physically fit. I can take control of my eating when I want to, but I find myself constantly giving myself excuses for putting that time off when I'm finally going to knuckle down and deal with it. You're also, as I mentioned before, you're sabotaging yourself when you can't say no. And this may not be immediately obvious to you. People-pleasing is one of the most socially accepted forms of self-sabotage around. So control yourself. Do not make the word yes your default word. Make no your default. I've done this full episode about it. It's episode 2. It's in season 1. Go and check it out. It's incredibly valuable. It's episode 2 for a reason. It was probably the biggest problem I had in productivity terms. And it does link in with that earlier one about being a fixer. I was helping so many people, I just wasn't getting my own thing done. Now, the 9th, I think, on this list, type of self-sabotage is giving up too easily. There's nothing wrong with moving on from situations that don't meet your needs. This might be the best option sometimes, but it's usually wise to take a step back and ask yourself first if you've really made an effort. And the final indicator on this list is the one, I call it an indicator. Originally, this episode was going to be called 10 Indicators of Self-Sabotage, but I realised that it's really types of self-sabotage. It's not an indicator which says you might have self-sabotage. If you're doing these things, any of the things on this list, you are self-sabotaging. So let me rephrase that. The final type of self-sabotage in this list is the one I see all too often, and I've certainly suffered from it myself too, and that is negativity. I see this constantly in other people. Some people just always have a negative comment about everything. Very, very common on social media, for example. I think I've mentioned this person before. I've never named them and I never will. There's one person on social media. I swear to God, no matter what day she posts something, if I click on her posts on her profile, she's moaning about something. It is constant, and I'm too polite to say anything about it. If I did say something about it, I'd only just get blocked anyway. But I'm sure you yourselves recognize that there are people out there who are just negative all the time, and people who self-sabotage are more prone to expressing this sort of negativity. This turns into accepting self-judgments and abuse that you would not so easily accept from other people. I'd add to that, the more negative you are, the less that more positive people will want to be around you. And I'm not a particularly big believer in The Secret. That's why I've never done an episode on it. But I can certainly say that with a positive frame of mind, you are more likely to succeed. With a negative frame of mind, you are far, far more likely to fail. RuPaul said that negativity is basically laziness. It takes a lot of hard work to remain positive, but positivity always pays off. Sometimes you won't be successful simply because you are too lazy. I urge you to go back and find my episode on the microwave mentality that covers this in some detail. That's episode 23. So, self-sabotaging behaviours are often deeply ingrained and hard to recognise. Hopefully this list is going to help you out with them. But once you do recognise them, noticing how you hold yourself back can be hard to come to terms with. Keep in mind, though, that by recognising these behaviours, you've taken the first step towards changing them. Psychology Today suggests that once you've identified your self-sabotage behaviours, that you choose which pattern most hinders your success. So which of these 10 things that I've talked about today is the one you have the most trouble with? I've got trouble with a few of them, to be honest, but choose one of them. It also suggests next that you identify the triggers for that behavior and that you make a plan of actions to take instead the next time that type of self-sabotaging behavior comes up. Let's just have a quick recap of what we've covered, these types of self-sabotage that I've looked at today. And the first of these was procrastination. Second was avoiding things that run the risk of causing you pain. Third was the use of alcohol and drugs. The next one was being a fixer, then being a control freak. Then if you suffer from low self-esteem, quickly covered stress eating in there as well. And when you can't say no, also giving up too easily, and finally, negativity. So your call to action today is to decide which one of these self-sabotaging types most limits you and to make a plan to combat it. Use incremental changes over the next few weeks to conquer that self-destructive habit. And before I finish up today, I want to say a few words about Scare Scotland. I mentioned them in passing last week, and I didn't do them justice at all. So I reached out to Big Stevie from Scare Scotland, and he sent me a bit of a blurb. So Scare Scotland was actually set up 8 years ago to bring together like-minded people who wanted to work in the scare attraction industry, and they provide specialist actors and extras for the positions that TV and film productions struggle to fill. They created training courses for their people to upskill them so their skills are transferable, and they are very proud of their zombie horde and their undead academy where the training happens. It has developed over the years to include many different things beyond zombies, though they're definitely not a one-trick pony. And if you're running a production or you just want to get involved, I'd say they are a great group to get involved with. And they give their people the training for free. They provide free headshots as well. And in the future, they hope to try and offset some of the actors' costs to pay for things like Spotlight. They are also about creating opportunities for those who might not have them. And their achievements are many, including a #1 show at the Edinburgh Festival, working with Richard Gere, and on many TV productions, films, and over 60 scare attractions, including the award-winning Dread. And somewhere on my phone, which I'm going to have to look up, I've got their website, which I think I know what it is, but I'm not going to commit to it. Yeah, it is scarescotland.co.uk, but he's saying the website is getting some work done at the moment, and if you want to get in touch with them, if you're looking to hire them or you want to get involved, their email address is info@scarescotland.co.uk, so check them out, they are awesome. Next week's show will be all about the very simple but very useful productivity method, the Pomodoro technique. If you're struggling with procrastination, You have to check this one out. Let me finish today again with some more words from Stephen Pressfield, who wrote the excellent book, The War of Art, by the way. That's one well worth checking out. And he said that turning pro is a mindset. If we're struggling with fear, self-sabotage, procrastination, self-doubt, etc., the problem is we're thinking like amateurs. Amateurs don't show up. Amateurs crap out. Amateurs let adversity defeat them. The pro thinks differently. He shows up. He does his work. He keeps on trucking, no matter what. Or she. Don't shoot me. It's just a quote. Now, take control of your own destiny. Suppress those habits of self-sabotage. Keep on shooting. And join me next time on Film Pro Productivity and Success. The music that you can hear right now is Adventures by Himitsu. You can view the show notes for this episode on the official website, filmproproductivity.com. That also covers a full transcript, in fact. But you can follow my personal accounts on Twitter and Instagram, run out of time, at fight_director, or follow the show on Twitter at filmproprodpod. And please support the show by subscribing, spreading the word, and leaving an awesome review. Oh, I've got a bit of spare time now. I hate it when that happens. See you next time.